Kathy McKee.
Hello and welcome to everyone brave enough to try our first video chat. There are 19 of you, so that's a pretty good number who are comfortable with the computer format. Today we have one of the bravest women in the area who is willing to be our first speaker on the video. She has a very impressive record. She is Dr. Elena Sada, Professor of Education, Bilingual, Social, and Multicultural Studies at Eastern. And her topic on sex and the input on young people makes me wonder if Proud Boys and various other groups could be considered sex. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Sada. Maybe she can weave that into her talk. Dr. Sada?
Thank you, Kathy. Yes. Welcome, everyone. And I appreciate the participation. And Steve, thank you for being so clear with the directions. I was thinking, I also like asking questions. So I hope it's okay with you if sometimes I ask questions and whoever wants to respond to my question simply unmutes themselves and reply. Maybe I will take a couple of replies every time I ask a question. That makes the group more participative, and I think it's more meaningful for everyone. So you'll notice in the title that I'm sharing, it reads Sects and Cults in Today's World, Their Masks and Impact on Our Youth. And I added the term cults in addition to sects because I will be using similar definitions for both, and I'll explain that. Also, just for us to know, it's not only our youth that it impacts our economy, it impacts adults, as Proud Boys, as Kathy well said. So it is a theme that is very current and very relevant. So what comes to mind when you think of sects or cults? Here, anyone can say, share. What comes to mind?
Religious cults, extremists and such.
Brainwashing to a degree?
Yes.
Usually related to religion.
I'm sorry?
We're having a difficult time hearing you, Susanna. If you get closer to your computer.
Also, she's also muted. You need to unmute, Susanna.
Susanna, you can unmute yourself by holding the space bar. That's it.
Try again. Is it sex? I think of religion.
Mm-hmm. So religious groups, extremists, brainwashing, fanatism, right? We think of all that. And it's very close to what I will be talking about in different forms, not always as obvious. So this is a very sad image of a cult. As we know, over 900 US citizens died this day in Johnstown in Africa, Guinea. And it's one of the most drastic examples of the extreme of a cult, how this mass suicide happened. So when we talk, talking about, Steve was saying that Latin is a very difficult subject. I love Latin. And when we talk about sects, when we look at its etymology, we think of sequi, which is to follow. So it's a branch of a main religion, a sect. And it's often in conflict with society due to its questionable processes. So a sect in itself, as such, is not necessarily harmful. It's simply a branch of a well-established religion. However, when we address sects here, we're talking about harmful sects, and we will distinguish or specify why these sects are harmful versus the ones that might not be. And when we talk about cult, it comes from the Latin word to worship, and it's a system of veneration towards someone. And there's a lot of connection between a sect and a cult because most fanatic sects have cult personality, and a cult is not necessarily, doesn't always include a philosophy, but most of the times it does. So cult veneration of someone, that someone typically stands by a philosophy and a goal, which is imposed in a very in an unconscious or conscious way on the followers. So I think this gives us a clear idea, and you were on track when you mentioned what a sect and a cult is. So I'm going to, instead of asking if there's questions, I'm going to move on, but I'm sure there'll be questions in the next section. So you'll have a chance there. So who joins cults or harmful sects? Who do you think joins them?
Young people.
People who are disengaged from society and feel outcast.
Good. Young people, right? Pat said. Mm-hmm. Or someone. Anyone else?
For validation by joining something.
It's a desire for belonging, right? Being part of. Very good. Okay. So there are thousands of cults and harmful sects in the world, and with the impossibility to tally them, some estimate over 20 million people or many more. And it's hard to tally them because some sects are, as we said, harmful, others are camouflaged, some cults are very small, some are very large, and some cults to personality are not called cults, however they are. You know, we go back to the example of Proud Boys. So we will talk more about, you know, who joins these cults, but we're going to see that there's a wide variety, range of individuals who join these cults. So you have cults that are money-making cults. So you have the horoscope money-making cults like the Honohana cult. It is becoming very common among, you know, young people around the world. The Order of the Solar Temple, and they follow some knights from the medieval time, and they justify killings because the people who have the visions indicate the rest of the members that someone should die, so they're turning into gangs. So you have also Nixium. There's a typo there, it should be IX. Nixium is another example of a contemporary cult. And what's very interesting about this cult is that they had all the characteristics of a cult, but the people they were attracting were extremely successful people who did not need a sense of belonging, did not need a community. However, they had a very clear aspiration, and the leader tapped into that aspiration. So that is becoming more and more common now, and that's where the danger relies, and we'll discuss it because it's in connection also to the political life that we're living. Then there's, for example, the Church of Euthanasia, which is this sense of we need to free the world from such a crowded population and let the animals roam back again. You know, if any of you have grandchildren who watch the Marvel movies, the example of the gentleman who snaps his fingers and half of the population disappears, and then you have the whales coming back to the Hudson, and nature, you know, the pollution away forever, and so on. So you have these extremists, ecological extremes as well. You have realism and Heaven's Gate, which is they go by the UFS lies, and some are theories that have not been able to be proven. However, they really stand by them, and they believe in the realities of other worlds that are affecting us constantly. So I'm not denying that there's a possibility of UFS, but I am mentioning the fanatic, or we're looking at the extremism, the fanaticism aspect of this. Then there's thousands of others that are from religious groups and take fanatic faith. So, for example, you have Scientology, which is now clearly defined as a cult. You have KKK, of course, that is defined by racism. Children of God, Family International, which is a way to traffic children in a legal, quote unquote, way. Illuminati, and most of the conspiracies that we've been falling for were authored by this group, Illuminati, and they find their way very much in social media, and they present it as if it was true. So then you have the president retweeting it, and you have everyone else retweeting it, created by Illuminati, which is a very defined cult. And we'll show their logo so that you recognize it. And unfortunately, they borrow a logo that's been the tradition, one of our traditions, and it's in our bill. But that's they use that to ratify their one of their conspiracies about this world power that wants to take over the white race and so on. Then there's other groups that are terrorists. So you have, here's an example, the Shirinko, but there's many others that are provoking terrorism, and many of them are the extremist Muslims, which I have to clarify, it's not the Muslims, it's the extremist groups. They become religious sects that are extreme. So they cannot be, they are a sect, so they're not part of the main branch of the Muslims, because the main branch of the Muslim is not extremist. So that's where the whole problem with, damning Islam comes, because then you cannot damn the whole religion just because a sect created terrorism or follows terrorist idea. Then there's world peace, which is similar to Children of God. Then Unification Sanctuary as well. A lot of abuse of children, money making. The United Nations of Islam as well, the same. There's then some branches of Latter Day Saints, and you remember the incident in Waco. Many churches that where the pastor follows polygamy, where they marry minors, etc. So, and then you have Elizabeth Smart's kidnapper, right? You remember her and her kidnapping from Utah, and how the person who kidnapped her created his own religion. And this is an example of, there were only 3 of them, but it is a harmful sect that pursued a very evil act. So what's very, these are some images. KKK, this Illuminati is the one here with the eye. And as you know, that's also in our bills. So they linked the image that we have in our bills to their conspiracy theories, unfortunately. So then they use that to ratify their own theory. Then you have the other images just show different groups. You have Nexium, the Rainer, the leader right here, and he had his women be stamped by his initials in with fire. Terrorist groups, and then Human Extinction, well, we still can. It's the one I was mentioning about the movement of euthanasia, unconditional, and so on. So here's kill your fetus, not your pet, all those extremes. So who joins cults and or sects? Now, would you think something differently now that I went through this, do you have a more you have a wider perspective of who joins cults and sects? Any ideas? Steve, unmute yourself, please.
Oh, I can't believe I muted myself. Okay. No, it looks like when you put all that up, it looks like there's something for everybody in there. You might have 5% of the population that's not going to be drawn to something.
That's exactly the point. Yes. There is now things have changed. So before it used to be a lot of religious groups, cults that were had to do with, Hare Krishna, groups that were religious that attracted youth that needed a sense of belonging and so on. Now it seems like a lot of these groups have high ideals, apparent high ideals, and many of our people are attracted to those ideals, and they find a leader who really is courageous about it, and they see themselves reflected in that leader, and they throw themselves headfirst into these groups. So this is a very important thing to consider. So in other words, who joins cults or sects? I'll say almost no one. Why? Because when they're joining them, they don't realize they're joining them. Anyone can be deceived and recruited by sects or cults. So I joined Reigning Christi not because I knew it was a cult. I joined Reigning Christi because I had a high ideal, and the leader presented the group as a way to reach that ideal. In my case, was education for all, which obviously it's been in my blood since I was born. But in other cases is, for example, fairness in the country, or I have a feeling that the Democrats are taking away our money, or I have the feeling that such and such is destroying, or this group is destroying our moral family values. So their goal is a legit goal, but it becomes extremist as they merge with a mob, as they merge with a cult personality. And that's when this coincides, that the explosion is created, and that's what we witnessed on Wednesday. So in the past, many who joined sects were needy individuals seeking a community. Nowadays, cults are camouflaged, and they appeal to individuals who are polarized by philanthropic or righteous causes. And I put righteous in italicized or in quotation marks, because righteous can mean many things to different people. Something righteous to an extremist white supremacist, or an extremist Muslim or extremist Christian, can mean many different things, from what is righteous to someone who considers themselves more moderate, etc. So all this, I think, gives us a good perspective, a wider perspective of where we find these sects and these groups. So this is a very nice chart of a variety of women, most of them very successful, and they were all recruited, and they were all part, one way or another, of NXIVM. And so half of them are actors, actually all of them are public figures. So it's really interesting. Why? Because NXIVM had this way of attracting people who were polarized with the ideal of self-improvement. So anyone who really who thinks that they want to every day be the best they can be, in all ways and shapes, like professionally, health-wise, heart-wise, they were attracted to NXIVM. In my hometown, some of the elite families who had a lot of resources were presented to NXIVM as a way to raise their children in a global, multilingual setting. And that was very popular where I grew up, because it's a very cosmopolitan city. So there were 5 families who took everything with them and moved to New York to Syracuse, where Nexium had their headquarters, and their 3-year-olds were learning 5 languages simultaneously, and they were thrilled. And they were learning self-help, and they were eating healthy food, and so on. And after 3-5 years, when things started to shape, you know, in a difficult way for the leader because he got involved in some legal issues, that's when they started waking up. But it took all this time for them to realize it. So it could be very dangerous, and it's all around us because there's a lot of us very passionate about topics and themes. And if we find a group that is swinging the carrot in front of us, we'll go for it. So, and it has been a vacuum of critical thinking in our schools. So it's part of what is happening. So schools and families and so on. So this is, and after this, I'll open for questions, but this is an example. Here you have Rainer, the Nexium leader, with the Dalai Lama, you know, and he actually donated $1 million to the Dalai Lama, and they were in conferences together. So they were seen hand by hand as 2 amazing leaders who were promoting humanity, you know, humanism. So then you have the Illuminati all over Twitter, creating the most outrageous conspiracies. But they have people who studied marketing and communication. So they're just genius in expanding all these lies all across the world. And we have our kids sometimes repeating them from TikTok or from something, and we're I am paralyzed. I'm numb when I hear things like that. You know, from the kids, and you say, okay, where do I start to explain to them that that's a lie, right? So then this this in the middle is the founder of the group I belong to, Father Marcel Maciel, and his headquarters is right here in Cheshire, Connecticut. And that's John Paul II, who was canonized by the Catholic Church. And I was in Rome where John Paul II once told me, when I told him I belonged to Regnum Christi, I love your founder very much. So he totally deceived us, including the Holy Father. And well, I believe he was deceived by him. Many in the Vatican knew what happened, but if you have a question about it, I can explain what, you know, how it just evolved into the most brutal abuse of the Catholic Church within the 20th and 21st century. But that it became a sect once again. You know, it's not. I cannot say that the Catholic Church is a harmful sect. I'll say because religion is not a sect. Religion or a cult. Religion is meant to be an institution that serves many people to find the spirituality. Spirituality is a goal, and religion is a path for many. And that's why there's many religions, and that's why people can find spirituality with or without a religion. But if people choose to find spirituality through a religion, it's very honorable. And that's why all religions should be, you know, taught and promoted as long as they are not harmful sects or cults. So his group, unfortunately, took a turn for the worse and became a harmful sect with the founder. The group still exists, just like Scientology, and a lot of harmful groups still persist. And this is actually a picture of me with the founder, because I had a leadership role in the States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And I was very close to him, and I was in the order for 19 years. So, and this is a picture of some of the members. So you would see them and never think of it. They're all educators, you know, and they have 3 universities and over 35 schools, and work in, you know, in different sectors of the world and so on. So I'll make a stop here and see if you have any questions before I move on into science and the main characteristics.
Steve, you're muted.
I thought. So while religion as you say, is not part of the cult or sect that you are talking about, it seems that often religion can shade into that without people realizing it. And what is it that causes that to occur? And how does, when at first you, as you say, you go into a subgroup that is actually part of the main religion, and then it somehow breaks off?
Yes, that's a really good question, and I will address it in this next part of the presentation. So that's a good question. Which, in short, it has to do with with a leader, a narcissist leader that infiltrates the group, and also it has to do with the means that the narcissist leader pursues for his own goals. And I'll explain that. Anyone else?
Would you consider a group like the charismatic group in the Catholic Church a sect?
I cannot make that statement, accusation, because the charismatic is a qualification of a way to live a spirituality. So there are specific groups with specific leaders in the charismatic movement that could be harmful sects. And I'm thinking of maybe one I came across that was lying to its members for money. But so when you talk about a charismatic Catholic or charismatic Christian practice, it usually refers to the sensibility of the type of spirituality that is lived within the religion, which is a very is using your senses a lot, right? They do a lot of dancing and holding and chanting and moving and the voice of the spirits and so on. So they have a lot of different components. It becomes a sect when there's lie, there's manipulation, and there's abuse of power. And that links to Steve's question, and I'll talk about those signs and main characteristics because it's very important. Good question. Okay, well, if there's
a question.
Yes, David.
Yeah. First of all, thanks. This is very interesting. Is Trumpism a cult?
I was just asked that question yesterday. I will go into cult of personality, and I will go into how you need a narcissist leader to develop that cult of personality and the consequences of it. And I think that will answer your question. I will also touch a little bit about how fascism is connected to this. And I guess it's public because I tweeted about it yesterday, but I think Trump got as close to fascism as our democracy allowed him. But that's another talk. And I don't think he's representative of his party. So if anybody here is Republican, I respect that 100%. I do think that Republicans are much better than that. And I know that there's different political opinions, and I respect them. But I will answer that question in the next section as well. Okay, so there are signs and main characteristics, and this is very significant because in less degree, this is a type I should say, these signs and characteristics can be present in a family or political relationship or affiliation. Answering your question, David. So yes, those characteristics and signs can be present in a political relationship, and it becomes cultish. It becomes a semi-cult. So it's a lack of, it doesn't have the same structure, but it's still a cult. So, so there's a certain process. So as I talk about the process and the signs, you can think, well, the charismatic group I'm familiar with, or the Trumpism I'm familiar with, and see if it matches, or any religious group that you've met, or any group you're loved ones might be familiar with or in touch with. So first of all, there's a very intense focus on the ideal. And this is many times linked to the cult of personality, because this person just emanates this ideal, presents himself as the prototype of the ideal. And, I think in the case of Trump, I definitely think he did that, because when I saw read some research about why people were following Trump, most of them, great majority, and the difference was very significant, said that he says things that I wish I could say, but I don't say, so they saw themselves personified with those ideals that they've been kind of bottling inside of them. There's a rupture with an identity, and there's a sense of you're imbued of doubt, like you're completely doubtful about your own sensibility and your own judgment, because all of a sudden you belong to this group that shares your ideal, and they're presenting ways of life and ways of thinking that are supposed to be superior to you. So then you doubt yourself, and your identity is not as important as the identity of the group. And you identify yourself with their opinions, with the opinions of the group. So there's that rupture. And then there's isolation and replacement of all previous connections. So this can be more or less significant depending on the group. But in the group I was, we couldn't go home for the first 7 years. And our families could visit us once a year for a few days. And we could only write to our families every month. So they would censor all the correspondence. And this was an approved Catholic order. How all those norms got through, we were lied to, because we were told that the statutes, all the laws were approved, all the regulations had been approved by the Vatican, and we celebrated the day of the approval, and the Pope spoke to us on the day of the approval. Little did we know that the book that had gone to the Vatican, it was a totally different book than the book that they were showing us. So lies is a big factor in all these groups. Then, of course, replacement of your previous loves, like your family. All of a sudden, they put it down. So your family doesn't understand. Your family doesn't share the ideals you share. You're a special person. You're a loved special person. You have this potential that they might not recognize. So there's this replacement of family and group and community that they strive for, and all through manipulation and coercion of judgment. So in religious groups, many times it's said that we have to give in our will, and actually in human relationships, we have to give up our will, or we have to mold our will. I see that every day as a mother, because I want to do something, but my family wants to do something else. So I say, okay, let's go for it. But no one can tell me that I prefer to do something else, right? That's my judgment, and I have the right to prefer something else, but I choose to do what everybody else wants to do. So will and judgment are two different things. So a group can absorb your will, right? My boss at work can tell me what to do. I have no choice. I have to follow that if it's moral and it's legal and it's part of my job description. But no one can ask me to replace or give up my judgment. And many of these groups do that. They present your judgment as a limited, with a limited perspective, because the group knows better. And the result is that you belong to the group and the opinions of the group so strongly that all of a sudden, we as a group, because you're part of it already, and I'll talk a little bit about how you become accomplice, we have the truth, and everyone else is wrong. And there's coercion. This coercion becomes invisible. You don't know that you're being pushed to have that attitude and not to look at other resources. So all these people who, once again, believed in Trump blindly, when they were asked if they had seen the statistics about different things, different issues. They said, I don't need statistics. It was like 80% of them said, I don't need to read that. I don't need statistics. They have their sources, they had their media. The same thing when we were in the order, we couldn't see, we were told, some of us who were leaders, we were in contact with newspapers because we were around communities and people, right? But we were told that if we really wanted to be faithful, we shouldn't be reading those things because they are attacking us. And all of a sudden, everyone else is wrong and you're right. And since it coincides with your ideal, you defend it as much as you can. Then there's that connectedness to everything else that you had before is denied, right? With your family, with your previous ideas. And there's an identity disassociation. Gets to a point that there's so much confusion. You just have to go with the new you that they've helped you shape. And you can't get out of it emotionally. So cult of personality and narcissism is very much linked. And that's where I want to address your question, Steve, and the other question that Kathy brought up about charismatics. So all these leaders who've started harmful sects and cults, either politicians or family leaders, family members, a parent, for example, or a spouse, or and don't laugh when I say spouse, because there's actually the book that I put there, Stuck in the Soul. It's a 20-year research, longitudinal research of what happens in a family when one of the spouses is an abusive narcissist. And it's really the same pattern as with the leader of the cult and the same pattern as with the political leader. And it's fascinating. And the book I wrote is Blackbird. And it's a memoir, but it goes back and forth a lot with what I lived in the group. And it really talks more about my years after the order, because that's when I connected the dots. So it's called Blackbird. And it took me 10 years to process or to deprogram myself after living in the order, in the group for 19 years. And it took a lot of therapy. It took a lot of good reading. It took a lot of preparation. It took a master's and a PhD. It took an amazing spouse. It took, just name it, it took. And I also read that book, Stuck in the Soul. And it was very helpful because that's when you are able to connect not only, an abusive narcissist will create the conditions for a cult and a harmful sect every step of the way. Every step of the way. You cannot create a cult or harmful sect if it's just your spouse at home, but he will create a codependence with the members of the family so that the kids have a love-hate relationship to the parent. And the spouse creates a codependence.
It's 2:00.
Sorry, and they don't know how to get out of that relationship. And she puts herself down, or he puts herself down with the other one. So I'll talk a little more about that. But in the cult, that's exactly what happened. The leader was an abusive narcissist who camouflaged his abusiveness and his narcissism and presented himself as a very generous, giving priest who worked in the missions and so on. Everything was part of a bigger plan to have fans or adepts that would follow him, and part of a bigger plan to create a portfolio of experiences and a curriculum vitae, a CV of being amazing so that people could follow him and the Pope could recognize him. So abusive narcissists is, they're always the victim. I don't know if you whoever asked me about Paul, you asked me about Trump, I remember with our founder, and actually I did have a relationship. When I left the order, I left completely codependent to an abusive narcissist leader. So I married, my husband was, when I came out a year later, was also an abusive narcissist in the same fascism model as well, very Catholic extremist or fanatic. So so it was very unfortunate, but I thank God for it afterwards, because I learned to connect the dots in a very deep way, because it confirmed to me a lot of things, both inside and outside of the order, what an abusive narcissist does. And they're always the victims, you know, when they always think that they're treated unfairly, always. You know, and if you heard Trump this week, anyway, just a note. Their opponents are evil. And if you know someone who follows this, it's an abusive narcissist. And you have to reach out to the people around them so they don't develop codependency. Or if they're already codependent, they need to get, you know, they need help. So they're always a victim. They're always treated unfairly. Their opponents are evil. They turn, before I move on, they turn things around so that the victims become aggressors in their mind, and the aggressor, who is them, becomes victim. So not only they are the victims, the ones who were victimized by this narcissist, all of a sudden, he is promoting that they're all aggressive, that they're all the evil ones. They're never wrong, and they never apologize, never. So, and if they do apologize, sometimes they do just because it's part of a bigger plan of earning this sense of this cult of their humility. So that's something important to keep in mind. They do anything for praise and power. They manipulate the hearts and minds of their enablers. So you have a situation where the woman is abused, even physically, and he hits her, and then he hugs her and cries with her and asks for forgiveness, and she stays. You know, this is a typical case. So they manipulate the hearts and the minds of their enablers. They create a group of unconditional fans. And those who stormed into the Capitol, they were unconditional fans. They would kill for Trump. So they lie and believe their lies. If you contradict the lies, they go for the jugular and turn you into the movement's enemy. There's a very keen sense of vindication, or you know, getting back at you. They have them commit crimes or dirty work, if it's not extreme, on their behalf. You know, I won't walk Pennsylvania Avenue, but you will. And I tell you I will, but I don't show up. Or in the founders, he abused physically many children, right? And he would tell some children to do things to the other children. Or I won't go into it because it's very sad. But so he would make some people commit crimes, or the other children do things, so that they become allies all of a sudden, because they have no way out, because they become as evil as they are, as the narcissist is. So now they are committed to the order and to the evilness, or to the wrongdoings. They produce codependents who don't question and defend their character. They defend unconditionally the leader or the narcissist, because that's the only thing they know how to justify. They have to defend the narcissist to justify their relationship with him or her. And they produce codependents who see everyone who criticizes the leader as enemies. And it really takes a world to break away from that. They're jealous if they're not at the top, and until they convince themselves that they are at the top. So I remember in one of the interviews of Trump when he was young, when they were in the Trump Tower, and the amazing woman interviewing him, I can't remember her name right now, said, you must feel very proud and so on. And then he pointed out at the Plaza Hotel, and he said, and I own that one as well. And she said, yeah, wow, that's a beautiful building. It is a beautiful building, and I'm happy. I'm glad I owe it, because there's no way I could come up to this tower every day and see that building and know that it's not mine, right? So there's this sense of jealousy that I need that the other person has. It was the same with our founder. When another founder was promoted in the eyes of the Vatican, he would just criticize them to death in a very subtle way. So they wouldn't say, they would say things like, "Oh, it's a pity that he committed those crimes some time back, right? No one really talks about it. That's good that no one talks about it, so that he can have a chance in the eyes of the Pope. But we have to be aware of those things, like very subtle way, making lies to put everyone else down. And then these lies. So I think it's worthwhile to talk about how is an abusive narcissist created, and it's more common than what we think. Maybe you've seen them in the workplace or in a family or in political life or in a cult or a sect like I did. And these are people so we are all a little bit narcissists. We're born with narcissism, and it's term given to love of self, right? So it's a good thing to love ourselves and to protect ourselves and to rationalize things in the favor of our identity and find our own place in the world. So all those things are good. However, narcissism, as we have that as a child, it's meant to develop into the different forms of love as we grow older. And one of that form is love of self, but it's never on the account of the community's well-being. So that is a normal development in a human person. However, there are some children that suffer so much when they're young, at the age of 6, 7, 8. Those are crucial years. They suffer so much that if they're very smart, smart is, as a professor, I shouldn't really use that word, but I'm using it right now for this, in this situation. If they're very skilled in their own mind manipulation, they will start creating their own reality of their own world so they can survive. So, for example, in the case of our founder, Father Maciel, he was abused sexually by some workers in his father's ranch, and he was always, when they found out about it, he was made fun of even by his own family, instead of seeing him as a victim and, gay, and just calling him these names just because he was abused by other men in the ranch. And he was very young, so he took a stand that I'm going to have sex as a child in my own terms. And he started then becoming, abuser himself, which is not always the case with everyone who's been abused, but it happened with him. But then he created his own reality. I am a saint who have gone through trials and will continue going through trials, and I will go through persecution, and I will have enemies, and they will accuse me unjustly, and the whole world will be against me because I'm a saint, and that's what saints go through to show their sanctity. And he just believed all those lies. And when we hear a politician, abusive narcissist say lies, many scholars believe that think that they're believing them, because they're abusive narcissists. They are creating their own reality constantly, and they really submerge themselves in that reality. So Hitler, for example, was an extreme, right? He created his own reality. When Hitler had to be shaken out of his reality when he lost, he killed himself, and after killing his generals, or killing everybody, or everyone killing each other, we don't know yet. But the point is that when that schema doesn't fit, they have to just go. When our founder was found guilty, it was at the end of his life. He foresaw that it was going to happen, and he created this false story of how only the faithful ones would remain, because there were going to be all these lies made against him. Even the church was going to say lies against him. And then at the end, he just lost it. He became mentally ill and just went into a different mental world, that it was not even senile. It was just a consequence of his narcissism. So at the end, no one can subsist if they cannot preserve their lie. McCarthy, the Republican senator that we had in the 50s, it was the same thing. He created his own lie about being persecuted by communism everywhere. Maybe some of it was true. I don't know. It's not my specialty, so I won't go into it. But the thing is that he became an alcoholic and died right after that, when he was taken out of his made-up world. So this is something that you will notice in narcissism. So if politicians, spouses, parents, and bosses, group leaders are narcissists, what could happen? That would be my next question to you. But before I ask that question, let me see if any of you have questions. And I don't know how we're doing with time, Steve.
We're fine. We're fine. We have plenty. We have half an hour.
Oh, good. So if anyone has questions or comments at this point, I can stop before I go into the next section, which is our final one.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
That's quite a list that you put up there with about an abusive narcissist, and also its application to the people who follow them. How do we get out of that, or how do people who follow them get out of that?
Yes, I address that in this next section. But in general, they don't always get out. That's a sad reality. Some research shows that people, even if they physically come out, sometimes they don't come out completely, and they isolate themselves. And those who get out and live what scholars would consider emotional healthy lives go through a very long process of healing. And I'll talk about the process and the elements that needed in that process, because I did have to go through it, and it's very important.
You obviously made it through it, and you should be congratulated for it. But I'm worried about cults that have millions of people in it.
Yes.
And what happens?
Yes. Okay. So because I want to show you, I have a graph with a diagram, and I'd like to apply it to them too. So if you have patience with me, I'll get to that. But remind me to apply it to that scenario as well when I go through the diagram.
I was struck, Elena, by the similarity of spousal abuse and the typically women who are victims of that in a relationship, and what's going on with abusive narcissists. But one of the things that occurs repeatedly was that people who are abused in a relationship and find their way out of it often go back, and their next relationship is often a repeat. And I wonder if the same thing might be true of many of the people who leave cults that are led by abusive narcissists.
Totally. Yes, totally. So it is like a textbook thing. It's through the code. There's a great book about it. I think it's called Codependence. And you develop a codependence that you can't get out of unless you have treatment. You know, you really need treatment. The only person who didn't see a shrink that I know of that was able to successfully get out of it was Elizabeth Smart. But she followed a process with her mother, who walked her through. Her mother became an expert in the topic and walked her out of that codependence. Because as you may remember that at the end of the 6 months, Elizabeth wouldn't escape. She had already developed the codependence. So I'm glad you brought that up, and it relates to also what Paul was asking, because when we talk about an abusive narcissist, there's different degrees of abusive narcissists. So you have an extreme case like Johnstown or like Hitler, etc., or you have just a person who's making everybody's life miserable at home without physically engaging. You know, so it's or a boss that just puts everybody down all the time. You know. So of course it's huge, the degree or the realm, the range within the narcissism scope. So you have the pathology, like Maciel or Hitler, and maybe our president. I don't know. Sorry if I hope I'm not insulting anybody. And then you have the mild case, which, you know, could be in a very mild case. Many of us have a little bit of that, and then others that are just impossible to deal with, or that are always putting everybody down. So, so okay, let me continue because I'm going to address more systematically those two questions, unless there's anything pressing. Okay, so if politicians...
I have a question.
Yes.
You talk about a cult leader. I know you're afraid to insult the whole Republican Party, but if you look at what's going on in this country, it's not just Trump. It's also leaders like Ted Cruz, Rudy Giuliani.
Yes.
These are leaders too. So it's
Yes.
not just one leader of the cult. There are multiple leaders of the cult.
Yes.
My second question is related to people not wanting to wear masks during the coronavirus. Is that because their leaders are saying you don't need to wear masks, or is it just because the culture of the United States is one of extreme individualism, and I have the freedom to inflict danger upon other people if I want to? I mean, is that a cult? This belief in individual freedom to expose others to danger, is that a cult, or is that just American individualism?
Those are great points, Bill, and thank you for bringing up what you said about the enablers. And I think that many of the enablers, the other sub-leaders, are also abusive narcissists in their own stratospheres. So you have, for example, some radio, extreme conservative radio shows where those men leading, many of them are, abusive narcissists and so on. So yes, absolutely, they use each other as a platform for control and power and their own means. So yes, and I think that's what makes it so dangerous, because some are enabling and others have a microphone, so they're just using each other for the same purpose. So about the masks, I think it's a little bit of both. I don't know what the others in the group think, but I think it's both. One is that they are believing in no mask, or they stand affirm that they don't need a mask in virtue of the leaders who are saying, I don't need a mask. So that's the cultish part, right? When everyone took that poison in Johnstown and poisoned their kids first, which I cannot even imagine, even while some kids were whining and screaming that they didn't want to die, and the parents still did it. They're doing it in virtue of the faith they had in their leader, and that's an extreme case of harmful procedures promoted by the leader. So yes, it could be a sign of a cult to personality that leads to be blind and follow those wrongful indications. Now, but I think also that it has a little bit to do with the stigmas that there are in the United States. There's stigmas, and partly could be because of that sense of independence, personality, but I think also because we've never experienced something like that. It was interesting when it was March 1st, when we had just really we came to the conclusion that this was imminent. It was here. We needed to do something about it, right? No one was wearing a mask at that point. I remember I have a mask at home that is a heavy duty mask because I have asthma, so I use it when there's a lot of pollen outside. And when I adopted Francis, the little one, I went to get him at an orphanage when we had the swine flu in Mexico City, and that was the epicenter of the swine flu. I don't know if you remember the swine flu, but it was very deadly, more deadly than this one, but it didn't develop. It was not as contagious. So we went to Mexico to pick him up and brought all this medication to the orphanage where he was, because there were a lot of kids getting, it was very dangerous. So I remember wearing the whole outfit, and my friend did too, and we got him, and we came out of there and had to follow all the process of adoption and the paperwork. We were in all these office buildings, and everyone was completely protected, So I demystified the whole mask situation in that experience that I had. The mask didn't mean to me that I am walking around the street being contagious. The mask meant life, because I went through that experience. I think the States had, and the same was in Asia, in some countries of the continent of Asia, China and so on. They had experienced things like this. So it was very natural for them to wear masks. And so I remember March 1st, I went to get groceries wearing my mask. And people stopped me and said, I'm sorry, ma'am, you can't come in if you're contagious. I'm like, I'm not contagious. I'm just wearing my mask to protect myself. But imagine the situation where I couldn't go anywhere with a mask because they presumed that I was infected. I was thinking, why do they think that? And then I realized they've never been exposed. They don't know what it's like. So I think it's a little bit of that as well that could happen. Anyway, so that was my little, experience about masks. So if politicians, spouses, parents, and bosses, group leaders are narcissists, what happens? So if they are politicians, their followers will go to extremes for them, right? They will kill for them. They'll kidnap for them. If they are parents, they will be adored and hated at the same time because there's this codependence and they won't be able to completely reject the parent, but at the same time, they feel really hurt. If they are spouses, the partner either escapes or develops a pathological codependence. And that pathological codependence has to be treated to come out of it. There's no way out of it. And if they're bosses, the workers will be a means to their end and enemies if they don't comply. That's just the way it is. And if you detect a narcissist who's a boss who's a narcissist, you have to get out of there. That's what I always tell people when they come and explain to me how their boss reacts to their triumphs and their things. Get out of there. It's not worth it. If it's a group or a cult leader, they can be all of the above because the cult takes the place of your family, becomes a political aspiration, becomes the boss, becomes the spouse, becomes everything. So that's a very sad situation. Now, the subtlety of it all, this is really important. Narcissists and groups have adopted legit strategies from the human potential, what we talked about NXIVM, right? Legit strategies from the human potential and sensitivity movement. So they've developed this understanding of the human heart, because a lot of them are very well trained, and they mix all this understanding of marketing and what people will fall for and mix it with cult ideology and persuasive sales methods. So that's where you have the conspiracy theories. So popular. And I think that targets what you were saying, Paul, about the millions of people following, being part of this cult. So the heart, the blood that pumps that cult of millions is the conspiracy theories, is the lies. And the lies were created by people who knew how to fabricate them in such a way that they could sell and just be nailed deep down into the heart and mind of individuals. So it's a really hard process. First of all, narcissists, I don't know if you know this, you're aware of this, but there's no treatment for the pathology of narcissism. There's no treatment because narcissists will never seek for help and they will never accept that they need help. So there's no treatment. This goes to a therapist and the therapist has a conversation, they usually just send them home. I'm not kidding you. I mean, I've had experiences with people who, anyway, I won't go into it. So, but people who follow the narcissist, codependents, enablers, they do have treatment. So they have to, first, I'll talk about a process for that, and they have to come to terms that they were lies, that they were lied to. That's the number one thing. So the subtlety of it all, it's only oh, this is a joke. I'm not as funny as Steve, but I thought at least I'll put in a joke. It's only a coup if it comes from the coup d'etat region of France, in France. Otherwise, it's just sparkling fascism. So why is it so subtle? Because of the way the world has embraced certain fascism. There is a very strong relationship between cult of personality and fascism. And I don't have time to explain fascism right now, but there's a great series I think it's a series or a documentary, maybe in Amazon, called How Fascism Started in Europe, I think. And so I use this slide to explain that, how it got started and how we have it and how it just matches narcissism. So it's very interesting because on the left we have Emperor Franz Joseph of Habsburg, right? He was, I don't have facts to say that he was a narcissist, but I'm using this example because it is documented that in Austria was having such a hard time in the 1800s unifying the country and creating a nation, because there were lands conquered from different ethnicities. So Austria didn't really exist as a nation. They were a mix of peoples and languages. So they created a strategy. So they created the first textbook for all schools on Austria, where they would drill kids about nationalism. And they created cults of personality to the emperor and to the monarchy, so that people could, they turned them into idols. Instead of having like TikTok music and dance idols, they had these monarchs that became idols. And that was one of the ways they were hoping to create Austria as a nation. At the end, it didn't work, and it was subdivided again, and so on. But this cult of personality, even back then, it's very dangerous, because you're fabricating, or you're putting a foundation that's very very fragile, and also you're creating a system or a culture where there is a priority or a white supremacy under culture, because these monarchs are white and they all look the same and they're from the same family. So I don't think that was the intention they had. They just wanted to create nationalism, which in itself is a good thing, because it's combined with patriotism, could be very good, but it just got out of control. So there were all these situations of the tendency of cult for personality, with hunger and inefficiency of governments, when Mussolini and then Hitler, and all of these leaders were kicked out constantly, Stanley, but then they were able to create their base, and then they were voted for. They were voted for. They came back and were voted for, because they never took care of those lies, because no one unmasked them. So that is something that I wanted to bring up, because it's extremely telling of all epochs. And I think history is going to prove that this period we're living through is no different than that. So my path, and that addresses how do we get out of this and how do we help people get out of it. So first you start with innocence, in a way, because you don't know how far it's going to take you. In my case, I was 18. I had this idea. I wanted to save the world through education. People needed, those who were not as privileged as I was, needed a good school, and I was there for them and all this. So I believed in Maciel and the founder and his order, in virtue of the faith that my parents had on him, and in virtue of the faith that the Pope had in him. I believe in virtue of the faith of my loved ones. So that's what happens at the beginning. You believe in the virtue, like if you think that people are being treated unfairly in this country, and all of a sudden someone comes and says, I believe the same thing, let's do something about it. And all of a sudden you see someone in TV who's saying the same thing. All of a sudden you're believing in him in virtue of this community belief in that person. And then there's an erosion of identity, and then there's a certain abuse of your own opinions, because if you say something different, you're made fun of. And all throughout this process, there's a total focus on the ideals. So the ideals become so important that all the means are irrelevant. what you do to get there is irrelevant. You just are completely focused on the ideals. And you go through a process of numbness and confusion and even illness sometimes and loneliness, because there's fear and shame and guilt that you're still not thinking exactly the way the group feels, but you're not the person that you left behind either. So it's a really painful process of mutation that you go through, and everyone, following the millions following a political cult or group, or those of us who are in the order, that isolation and that loneliness. I remember just yearning for my dad's hug, just yearning for, and you feel guilty that you're yearning for it, because that just shows that you're not there yet. And then at this point, you either seek help. So everyone who came back on Wednesday, those who didn't really enter the Capitol because they thought there was something weird about entering the Capitol, pushing police back, that stayed on the steps. If they come back and they seek help, it's going to look like, I'm going to read more about these groups, who are those people? Or at that point, I seek help and I take a leave of absence from that group or the cult, or I'm a wife or I'm a husband and I just take a break. I leave the kids with my parents for a little while and I just go away for a couple of weeks just to think things through better. Or at that point, I just go deeper and there's total numbness and potentially become an abuser, like the leader myself. And at that point, most of them don't come back. Now, if you go out and seek help, or if you are one of those imbued by lies, political lies, and you're willing to read more sources and so on, that's where people have to be around for you. That's a critical moment. I was listening to public radio the other day, and they were talking about the opium situation in the country and just how dangerous it has gotten to be, right? And they were saying that it's really difficult not to have a bed ready for people who call them with opium addiction, because if they send them home telling them, I'll call you as soon as I get a bed, next time, like in 2 days when they have a bed, people that had asked for help don't want the help anymore. They're back into their addiction. So that's why this process is really difficult, because you have to be there. The timing is very important. You have to be there in the moment where there's like a little crack in their heart and their mind of wanting more information to get rid of the lie. So that is a call for all of us, just to be there. Because if you just present the lie when that crack hasn't, you present the facts before the crack happens, you're just going to be pushed back. So nothing really comes into their mind or heart. But if you're just there, just stay close to the people, as soon as there's a crack, that's a chance to go in, and that's a chance to support. So that is like the culmination of the process, when there's that little crack, and then they begin a very long and painful healing process. But it's possible. So it takes therapy, it takes people who love you around you, it takes people who are very patient around you and not try to convince you of things, because if you try to convince them of things, you're going to sound exactly like the people who brainwash them. Someone mentioned brainwashing at the beginning. That's exactly what happens in the process of erosion of identity and abuse. You're brainwashed. So we cannot be those judging them because they're thinking differently, because that's exactly what the group they come from did, and we cannot indoctrinate them because that's exactly what the group they're coming from did. And there's going to be a total rejection of those, anything that even has any similarity with the group you belong to. So after this, there can be growth, like true growth. And I think I'm one of those blessed ones that really grew through it. Or there can be paranoia of, I'm always going to have to be on the watch for more narcissists. And I'm sure there's one in every person I encounter, or there can be both. Like you can grow and at the same time have some paranoia simultaneously. And then eventually you work out your paranoia. You know, my partner, my spouse now, well, it's really a partner, but I call him spouse because we're not going to get married. But we've been together for many years, and it was very interesting because he read a lot about how to help people who had been in cults, and that's one thing that he mentioned to me before. You know, that at the beginning, my lack of trust scared him, but at a certain point, it stopped scaring him because he understood. So he was just there and there and there unconditionally until I finally realized that there were good people around me that wanted the good for the sake of the good, you know, with not really wanting something back out of it. So that's so I hope that answers the question. Now, cults isolate the members and empty them of their beliefs in order to fill them with new ones. Beliefs that lead them to set aside their judgment and submit to the group leader. The process does not seem radical at the beginning. It is carefully crafted to happen in increasing doses. And that's why I put the frog in the hot pot, right? You turn the heat on once the frog is inside. Not that I've done it, but they say. Because if you put a frog in a hot pot, she'll jump right back. So no one joins a cult. I did not join a cult. I joined Regnum Christi because I did not know it was a cult. Maciel deceived us. In 2010, most of us admitted that without denying the good works of the group, because there were good people still there, Regnum Christi was a cult, or at least had all the cult elements. Leadership that commits crimes, is adored, cannot be criticized, has no accountability, a caste system where the leader is at the very top of the pyramid and is untouchable, a structure with informants or spies that forbids communication between subjects and between these and their families, a culture where the leader undermines other systems, including one's own family, and uses guilt for control and protocols that ration sleep, nourishment, and rest. So that's like a very dense paragraph. Is one of the pages in the chapter on cults. And the book, the way I wrote it, it's a novel. So I did it on purpose so that more people would read it, so that they wouldn't be afraid of an academic paper. So it really starts with the day I escaped and how I did it, and then how I found myself in Manhattan at 37 years of age, totally naive, not knowing where to go and what happened after that. So I try to put humor into it because I think humor was key in my process. It's a really good thing. And so what happens when you come out? There's peace and joy, but also guilt and fear. There's an identity and personality disassociation that continues, and a codependence that continues, and there's distrust. So I'll finish with these two phrases that they complete my soul, like my professional soul and my personal soul. We are one. After all, you and I, together we suffer, together exist, and forever will recreate each other, from Teilhard de Chardin. And then another one that I really love is contemporary. It's from Emmanuel Larte. It's a theologian from Africa. And he says, I am like all others. I am like some others. I am like no other. So it brings in this reality that we have this dignity that's intrinsic. We're the same as all people in that sense. And then we are like, we belong to a pod, like we belong to a community. We're like some of others, but then we're unique, cults and sects and narcissists will affect us in different ways. And we're not here to judge how that happens, but to be part of this other, recreating each other in a constant way. So thank you. I just listen to questions or comments at this point.
Well, thank you very much. I just have one follow-up question. You said that there was treatment for enablers, but they first have to come to terms that they were lied to.
Yeah.
How do you get, I won't even say the millions, but how do you get millions of people come to terms that they were lied to?
So I think that what the main social media groups or leaders are doing is the right first step. control, unfortunately, control the places where these lies are being disseminated, right? And then the other way is by creating bonds of trust. So let's give it. There's different centers or rings, right? So to create a network of trust, one of the main protagonists here will be obviously the new presidency, right? And the new group, the new leaders. So they will really have to appeal to listening to them. Okay, so tell me more about it. It should always be the answer to anyone from this group. Doesn't matter what they say. That's something Renee Brown once said, and it just stayed with me. And I think it's very wise, and I think that's what all our leaders should do, and all of us who are close to them. I do know I have quote unquote friends who went to Washington, didn't go into the Capitol, but went to Washington on Wednesday, because a lot of the ex-Regnum Christian Legion and current Regnum Christian Legion Catholics are supporters of Trump. You know, their priests and bishops have been telling us that if we don't support him, we're damned. I had a note from one of the priests who, when I promoted the video on Fit about Trump's narcissism, he told me that if I don't change my ways, I would be condemned. I'm not kidding you. And this is a priest in the Diocese of Spring, Colorado. And then when I told the bishop about it, I realized that the bishop had been accused of doing the same. So all this to say that what we need to tell them when they tell us all those things, I believe, and I think that's what the leadership needs to do as well, is tell me more about it. Tell me more about it. Like, really, they need to know that we're listening, because they think we're not, they think that we don't know what they know. That's the problem. They think that we have been lied to and that they're the ones who are right. So how do you deal with someone like that? Just simply listening, so you break their structure, their mental scheme, that you are an ignorant. So you tell them, you know, I read this, what do you think about it? And that thing that you read is something that they would read too. So tell me more about it. Has to be our go-to answer to all those defamations and lies that are repeated. And then once you hear, then you wonder aloud, you know, I wonder if there are signs or evidence of that. I was looking for evidence, I couldn't find it. Can you give me your sources? You know, so that they see you're not trying to prove them wrong. You're genuinely looking for the answer. Now they've been so affected that it's not going to happen within the next 4 years. I think that a lot, like my generation, the one that follows the baby boomers, my generation, I think we're lost. I think we lost my generation. A lot of people my age have chosen a very conservative, many extremist. I know a lot of good conservative people, so I don't want to use that classification, but I think that in general they've developed this tendency to just show their claws every time that you contradict them. So I don't even try to contradict them. I just say, tell me more about it, and then say, well, I really want to know the sources because I'm a historian. Sorry, deal with me. I'm a geek. Give me some sources, please. You know, I want to read about it. And they can never give you. They give you some social media post by a moron, or you can also lead them to Illuminati, which is the origin of the lie. You know, have them read about Illuminati. they created a lot of these conspiracy theories.
Okay, Bill Maroot, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm going to ask you to get out your crystal ball here. What do you think will happen after Trump dies?
You mean with his soul or with the followers?
Well, I mean, he is the focal point of the cult, and he is getting on in age, and someday he will die.
Yes.
Obviously there have been people all along beating the drum, the Rush Limbaughs and the Sean Hannitys. They'll still be around, or at least Sean Hannity will still be around. But if Trump dies,
There'll be another leader. I think we
there'll
have to
be
be ready.
you think someone else will come in to take his place?
I think so, because if you look at his enablers, a lot of them are from my generation. And when I look at the evangelical and Catholic networks, it's full of potential leaders like Trump. So more than, I don't think we can eradicate what he created. I think that one thing that we really need to do is learn. I think we all have the possibility to create a different paradigm around us. And the paradigm should be, it's okay to have different perspectives. It's okay. Like, that's not very common in the world. Only in academia I've seen this as something good. It is okay to have different opinions. It's okay if in a family there's people with different opinions. Because in that way, it keeps all of us in our toes searching for the truth. So even the wackos, even the morons that are posting that, are helping us find the truth. However, the way we go about it has to change. And instead of condemning it, we have to condemn the lies and the enablers, don't take me wrong. But instead of confronting the loved ones who are following them without giving them the chance to express themselves, I think that's where we need to start modifying our attitudes so that we can create bridges with those in our immediate circle. That would be one thing. So I don't think we can eliminate them completely. I think that we as teachers, professors have a huge responsibility. We have to teach more critical thinking. I think you have the responsibility of teaching critical thinking through your writings, through your interactions, by asking the right questions, more than always trying to explain things. I think learning to ask the right questions will be crucial for wise generations that precede us, like your generation. And then there's hope among the youth. Like my teens are not falling for it. Most of them are intermarrying. Most of them are exposed to cultures all over the world. And they hear how the other countries describe us, which is sad. But it helps create a different idea of who Trump is. So no, yeah, I think there'll be a lot of leaders among our generation, among my generation, who will try to follow that. Hopefully it won't be as disseminated, because hopefully we learn a lesson and he won't get to the presidency. That was what was so damaging. Germans have a great education system where there's things that can be improved, but the one thing they do really well is that they take all their kids to field trips to see the atrocities of the Nazis. And they do it because they have to address the mistakes that the nation committed so that they don't get another Hitler in power. And that's where we have to be in education and in our literature, in our op-eds, your opinion pieces that you might be able to publish, or your conversation with your friends, to address it instead of erase it, and to learn to ask the right questions so that there could be more critical thinking. Yeah, but those who are already brainwashed, I don't think we'll be able to change them without, like being by their side when that crack opens in their head and heart, to be able to bring some light.
Are there any other questions, comments? Elena, I was wondering, because I was on a board of something and they wanted to get a grant to help abusers, spousal abusers. And I refused to vote for it because I said, these people, there is nothing that works, the same as you. You said Narcissus, nothing has shown to work.
No.
But then I asked the question that no one can answer. I said, the one thing is, if you get a person out of themselves and by something like hypnosis, has that ever been tried, do you know, with such people with any degree of success?
You know, I don't know, Steve, but that's a really good question. I wonder, because it is so ingrained, like they are already in the pathology of narcissism where they're already in their own reality. So it would take something maybe like that. You're right. And I don't know, I don't have the answer. The book I recommended, the doctor who studied them for 20 years, says that there's no solution because they don't think they need the help because they're the victims. Everyone else around them need the help.
My solution was to hire a guy from the Providence Mafia to take care of them. They were all social workers and they didn't like that.
No, I think the help here would be with those around him. So everyone who's developed, to presuppose that everyone around him, who is still around him, developed codependence and that they need treatment.
Yeah.
That would be a solution. And then isolate those people, you know, and then they end up dying by, you know, like killing themselves literally with alcohol or loneliness or something. It's really sad. And I'm sorry I'm presenting it like that. Sometimes I don't even feel bad for them because they've done so much. Those with the pathology, they've been so evil to others that, you know, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Ordinarily, you are the first person, our first virtual speaker. We would present you with the CLIR mug. Now, I know it's a mirror image, and you're going to have to wait about a year until you receive it. But I will come darken your doorstep in Webb Hall one day, about a year from now, and you will have a mug, and you will be at the status of the president, the provost, and your dean, who each have earned their CLIR mugs.
I love it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank everybody for coming in. Next week, a week from Thursday, is the next speaker. Will be on an art expert from India. And I'd like to say that I have heard this person, and the reason I'm speaking about it is not to take anything away from Elena, but she presents it in a way that's very personal, which we just got today, that combining the personal with the academic is an unbeatable combination. And you'll find that the next person does the same thing, talking about her own personal interactions in India. So thank you very much, Elena. Thank you all for coming. And this meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you.